B major. A scale in book 1. And a scale in book 2. In fact, Bach uses a lot the steps, the scale and the steps, probably an allegory of humanity rising step by step to a high inspiration, to a spiritual uplifting. When you hear the stable ostinato that holds the note, and then you have the quarter notes rising until the leading tone over the tonic, the dissonance of the major seventh. And then you have the patterns. Of course, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 have always in him. It's not just a toolbox, it's not just an analytical fact. It's really that the expression of his music is organized, is meticulous, and as creative in its polyphony, remains an expression of uplifting spirits, of solace, even to a certain extent of consolation for us humans. And his music seems always to flow in a continuous group of 16th notes or 8th notes, always from the second to the next first, so that it connects to 3, 4, 1, to 3, 4, 1, to some kind of path to eternity. I like to think that his music hardly starts or ends. It just appears, and then when you drop out of it, it continues somewhere. At least in your mind, in your heart, in your head. You keep hearing his music after you heard his music. It's almost as when you're in a train and you feel this motion of the train. And when you're off of the train, you still feel inside your body the train continuing to drive inside you. It's almost like a flow of unstoppable energy, self-generated, with benevolent goodness, even through chromaticisms, with rising intervals, with expression of uplifting. It is inertia, divine inertia. Of course, you could think about the interpretation and think, what if I try to play it in cut time when it's in 4/4 and I go... Instead of beat by beat, I go bar by bar, stretching large steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But I still believe that we need to always keep open perspectives of other point of views, from the tempo to the pulse to the articulation. It's almost like when I used to, as a child, to have to copy the fugue and the preludes of each week. And the time it takes to write is slow. Regardless of the tempo, you would hear or play the piece, like in Book 2. But when you write down note by note, the B after the 16th note rest, the C sharp like Saturn, D sharp, and then you make the connection, then you start again, 4 16th notes, until the tonic. And it is so important to start off beat because you have to arrive on the downbeat, and you have 2 times 4 16th notes for the first 2 beats, but you have only 7 notes in the scale. So if you start on the first note, you arrive 1 16th note too early, and because you have 2 groups of 4 16th notes in the beats, therefore you have to start 1 delayed so that you can arrive on the downbeat. 1, 2, 3. He does that in the first invention. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And here is in the left hand. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And right hand. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4. If Mademoiselle Boulanger was here now, she would make you practice the offbeats without the parallel aligned on the first, third beat, first, third beat. So mi fa do la mi fa do la si, mi fa re si, mi fa re si do, and the left hand la do mi re si re. So it can be a change of bow, or we change the impulse. Mi fa do la. It's not an accent, it's not a staccato, it's not an interruption for pianists. It's just a re-articulation instead of... You do? That functions even in faster tempo, but then you don't have the crisp air legato. You can... Does it matter which tempo you play? What matters is to cherish the voices, to cherish the patterns, to cherish the lips, to cherish the articulations, the anticipations, the trills, the mordents, the accacciaturas, the suspensions, the all these things which blend in one single statement of a simple scale, up and down. I can say, that's very not, it's banal. I mean, anybody can write a scale up and down. Probably you do that when you practice your scales. And Bach too. The simplicity, the evidence of the simplicity, not for being not complex, because he can be, and he is sometimes extremely sophisticated, but the simplicity is some kind of divine gift of seeing over the many notes. The hypermeter, if it's a 4-bar section of 4 beats each, that is what you have to glide towards. Always go somewhere. Not just play the note for the note, the harmony for the harmony. Give a meaning to it. Play what it means to you. You don't have to explain it like I attempt poorly, but just tell it to yourself, and then keep trying, because you're going to shape it just like a sculptor taking the material, which in this case is the harmonization, which in the first prelude he was doing in book 1, just a simple arpeggio. Here it could have been 2. You can almost bake your own prelude according to the skeleton of the first one, for instance, and dress it up in the other ones. They're not interchangeable per se, no. He really chose which one goes where. The Lament for this, the French Overture for that, G minor book 2, E flat minor book 1, C sharp minor book 1. Some only, especially for the jubilation of the hands and the fingers. And this is clearly so in G major of book 2. And I think that his desire pedagogically is to develop the capacity of various touches. Toccata today seems always to be detached and martellato, but in fact, from Frescobaldi onwards, and even before actually, toccata was touch in the sense of plural, the different types of touches, not just the detached touch. The legato, the non legato, the air legato, the staccato, the wet staccato. So many graduations. But nonetheless, as I said earlier, you feel like his music is as evident as complex as transparent. The way he deals with the spacing between the voicing, between the way he spreads the texture, either with transparency, either in intensity, density, sometimes even in intensity. I'll give you an example. When you start this B major book 2, you feel like you're playing a two-voice invention. When you go to the end, you hear that is almost already calling for the Waldstein. So from this peaceful scale, we go to the repeated nines. Who would say that if you take it out of context and say, who composed this? You'll think Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring Chords. Of course not. But nevertheless, for his time period, believe me, not only that, but in minor, half diminished seventh, second degree, plus on the dominant, and then the dominant of the tonic. So he alternates the complexities with the simplicities. For instance, in the modulation in G sharp minor in the book 2 B major, that sounds just so simple with the scales, but then look at those scales. Patterns and the circle of fifths and the motions, and then in the right hand and the same hand with stems up and down, imitation with chromatic ascension. Jaworski speaks about these gestures of Bach's melodic design, that they represent the struggle of human spirit to go beyond its limitations of sin. And how important it is to please not blend them, just because of the pretense that there is a decay of the half note regardless of the tempo or the acoustic of the piano. Well, that might play a little bit. It's in those cherished, shaped, sculpted details of voicing in even bridge, miscellaneous section thematically in the section of the piece that you define the quality of what you do from inner quality beauty to outer quality beauty. That's the elegance of being always in case you search, you hear the melody, the secondary voice, which could be primary if you choose to bring it. voice in the background. But don't blend them together. Even if, in a way, you can argue that possibly composer as Bach knew very well about the spacings, and he would have possibly perhaps imagined that ultimately people would blend the combination of the two. I personally remain faithful to the reading and to the stems up and down on the same staff. Of course, if you copy it by hand as I did, you'll copy it on 3 staffs, or as many as it takes, and for the prelude or the fugue, and so that you follow the voices with their interruptions and with departures. They're stopping or they're holding and they're releasing after the tense half note tied to a suspension and then rising chromatically, and you pick it where the decay of the playing brought you to, in order to avoid a brusque accent that is unwilling. And if you notice it in your hearing, then attune it to your inner hearing not to do it. By playing the E louder, and then pick up the D sharp where it died, and re-rise to F sharp. And those sequences are at the heart of Bach's explanation of how he moves from one section to the other by the sequences. If Mademoiselle Boulanger was here, she would make you synthesize the function of the harmonic progression. And if you want to do it by ear, she would stop you, because she doesn't want you to do it by ear, even if you have a guiding musical ear, guessing, hearing, assessing the intuitive, talented ear, what you're given, which is driving you towards the sounds more than perhaps towards other forms of art. But regardless, perhaps as well, it doesn't have to be exclusive. The point is that she would make you practice the section with the acknowledgement where you go, and how you modulate, and how which secondary dominance you hit. In other words, to inhabit the very essence of the musical idiom of Bach. And then once you're writing it down, noticing it, harmonizing it in the, let's say, sculptural way for the interpretation, but very much skeletal for its harmonic progression. And you could think, okay, what's the purpose? It's just like playing scales when you practice to equalize your fingers. For keyboard harmony, you do sequences. And you follow the functions, just like Bach did, because you have to reach at some point a little bit of the level of Bach's hearing in order to have, first of all, an awareness, an immersion in his expression, in his language, in his idiom, in his agogic, in his grammar, and of course the usage of different affects, minor, major, diminished, seventh, tight, suspended, delay, resolution because of suspensions. All these are parts of his ecosystem. And you find it in comparison in another prelude and fugue. And it makes you think about a section where he uses a pattern, a lifting octave, and an interval of a sixth, a hemiola here, a departure on the second, 16th note there. And you realize that, in a way, at the elemental level, all his pieces have some kind of common nucleus from which he develops, blossoms incredibly complex or simple, and at the same time self-evident beauties that even if you don't understand, you connect to, because musically the harmonic progressions, the melodic organizations, the equal voice leadings of the parts brings you in another world without hierarchies. And it's not just to fake listen to the horizontality of the patterns, colorizing or playing one and sing the other, but really take the time. First write, then sing and play. That's true. Speak perhaps if you can't sing solfege, if you can't la la la, whichever way, but let first the piece enter in your inner world, and then when you play it, of course you need the cognitive facts of fingerings and the correct dispositions according to your own morphology, but ultimately it's about reaching the combination of what brings you to music magnetically and the music itself. And so there is a meeting point between you going to the piece and the piece coming to you. You can misunderstand it, you can disagree, you can change mind, and you will through your life when you replay or teach or hear or record or write article about any of these. But they're part of your vocabulary as a musician. They are part of your philosophy as a musician. There is no hidden under the carpet voicing that is not comfortable. Everything, middle voice, outer voice, have its own, they have their own nobility of being, and the ornaments and the decorations compared to the measured or unmeasured trills or mordents, upper or real note, and how you organize with or without termination. These are variables. Of course, they're grace notes compared to the real notes, and beyond the decoration notes, you want to always bring the out because you hear it, because you think it, not that because you accent it. It becomes like an inner richness. You don't have to demonstrate it, but you are in the tracks when you hear the music and you play. Oops, sorry for this E. So you want to go B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, and then inside you have trill or the patterns, but those details shouldn't stop you from following and anticipating, as if the score comes in 3D and you hear Si, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Mi, Do. You could hear it intuitively. You don't even have to name it, solfege, to speak it. Just sing it inside yourself, and it will be your guide through the tracks of his. And always mark down where you find the highest notes in the right hand top part and see, okay, then I will prepare this arrival of this high A natural 5 of 4 in B major in harmonic progression secondary dominant. And you know that it only comes at bar 8 and not before. And so you plan. And then soon, there we go. And then redrop. Every 2 beats. Until the dominant, after which you have the section of the, which we saw earlier, the rising chromaticisms, and then the chromaticisms in the right hand, but the left hand plays circle of Fs. This way you get to the to the relative minor, G sharp minor. It must have been such an amazement to be able to play a piece starting in one key, arriving on another key on the same harpsichord, because of this well-tempered tuning of the unisons over the major thirds, and allowing you to play in very distant, unusually playable keys until then. Today, it might escape us in terms of the audacity of what he presented. And even if there were people before him like Caspar Fischer, who wrote already prelude fugues in several of the keys, not every chromatically. And he knew about it since he basically borrowed the E major fugue of Book 2. From Kaspar Fisch's Ariadne Musik cycle. So it's not like he comes out of nowhere. People wrote fugues before him, but I think he brought it to a level of even for a pedagogical purpose. He writes a piece that has expression, that has structure, that has balance, that has elegance, that has polyphony, that has different rhythmic patterns, that has different volumes of dynamic ranges between the harmonic progression by bar, half bar or beat. And so you feel like he's exploring all kinds of things to teach his students how to play, how to hear, how to think, how to anticipate, how to shape, basically how to treat the piece with their musicianship. Of course, it was a common, shared, open toolbox for his time period in northern Germany, but nevertheless it is now for us universal, eternal, centuries after, and it's not only North German. And of course, when he likes to play the scales with the two hands combined to test not only the equality of the notes, not just reciting syllables, ta, 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 but also organizing shapes, 2, 3, 4, 1, bottom stems, up stems, down stems, up, down, up, as if they were bowings, ta-da-da-dum, pa-da-da-dum, through re-articulation without staccato or accent. Just a hint, beyond that is an exaggeration. And if you don't do that, you'll sound banal. Of course, it's a sequence again. And I want to say that Bach is banal. It's not what I mean. What I'm trying to say is that he doesn't shy from complexities like the chromatic risings. And then at the same time, he plays right away, a few bars later, scales with circle of fifths. And then together it sounds busier. And he carefully demonstrates where is the left hand, where is the right hand, and how the scale goes from one hand to the other. And in book 1, you could go faster, and so can you in book 2. That's not a question of can you, it's should you. And if you do, what do you gain? Character, coating, more than the generic elemental facts of his scales, of his ornaments, of his decorations, of his suspensions. Because in a way, when it goes so fast, you hear less of what's going on the way to the arrival point of the punctuation, of the group of hypermeter bars, all these patterns that overlap each other like Russian dolls. From the detail micro to the to the macro. And so in a way the tempo has to find the pace that defines, through the harmonic progressions and the complexities of the articulations, the tempo that combines both the flow and the detail, the direction and the beauties that go on the way. As the philosophers say, the aim is but the journey itself, more than where it leads, even if you have this driven desire to reach it. So in book 1, the fugue starts on an upbeat and has step motion with a leap. So the first C sharp, you know by watching the score, it will be followed by the E. So you had A, B, C, and then C, D, E, and we turn to B. So you can say, okay, what is it? It's just, at best, a tetrachord starting with a leading tone. 4 in Greek tetra for the 4 sounds. And that's probably why when you multiply the voices that are cloned from this subject in the answer, plus the contra subject, very quickly it becomes peopled with benevolent voice leadings. You feel that sense of plenitude that fulfills your soul, that uplifts your spirit, that brings you without a necessity to reach a climax and drop, to rise until the very end, through whole out the fugue, whatever sequences happen through the way, and you finish with the open 10th. Open 10th is so important because the conclusive would be to have the tonic dubbed in the soprano, since you have 4 parts fugue and you have 3 voices, 4 voices, and you have triads with 3 voices because it's where a triad. So normally to be conclusive should be finishing on the tonic with the melody, but not, he finishes on the 3rd, which I think is a great openness. It doesn't end, it just continues at another level. I don't think he's overstating then to say that there is a spiritual journey playing a fugue of Bach, beyond all its technical knowledge, how to, and your realization where and how he broke the rules, for which purpose, if he does this or that type of answer, this or type or that of stretto, the real, the tonal. I mean, he makes choices, and it's not always on the book, but because of the spirit of the rule, he breaks it to reach other grounds. But he's very careful with the details of the inner voicings. That, I think, is nobility. And so in book 2, he writes it in cut time. They look at the cut time, it seems to be faster in 4/4 in book 1 and cut time in book 2. Does it mean that the 4/4 is slower because you count every quarter note? 4, 1, 2, 3, and here it's by half notes. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. But of course, when you combine them, you can think perhaps the flow is more natural if it's less slow. that kind of artistic, interpretational overdrive. Too loud, too fast, or too slow and too stretched and possibly almost chopped. I think it's difficult but essential to always yearn towards a balance, the right tone, the right tempo in terms of the flow without precipitation, unless you really think the character is like the A minor book 2. And then these gestures are very furioso, but here it's so peaceful. It's like A flat of book 1. It gives you a feeling of fulfillment, peaceful, strong and rising with you, and at the same time you respond to the piece as the piece fills up your lungs with this essential spirituality. I don't know that he wrote differently when he wrote secular from sacred, but I think that for him everything was sacred. And I think he brought in, even in the most just effective pieces for the sake of it, in this case for fingers, to study on the harpsichord how to become more with better velocity, he still brings in a very, very high level of spiritual uplifting. Reaching B minors, book 1 and 2. It's a bittersweet moment when you review the 48 prelude and fugues chromatically from the first, since it's the last. But since it's the gift that keeps on giving, it will be every time a new revisitation of them, bringing a sense of family by election. It doesn't have to be so sad. The walking bass can be phrased or even subarticulated. But not always slurred on the downbeats. And then the trio sonata top 2 parts in imitation, creating these painful, emotional, intense dissonances of suspensions. And if it's a flowing, more walking tempo, you can also bring the bottom part of the right hand more than the top part. peaceful. It has to remain reflective. And the fugue of it reflects, in my opinion, what Bach, in terms of musical gestures, in his melodic lines, does at best. Leaps of sixth, tritones, chromaticisms through diminished sevenths, starting on an upbeat to finish on a downbeat. That could have been already enough to have a subject that can be beautifully developed, blossomed into a great fugue, but he continues in the sequence of rising to the dominant. And the real answer? No, it is a tonal answer. I always thought the first day I discovered it, copying it by hand as a child, how neat is that Bach writes 2 minor and major sevenths in a row. He could have in so many ways avoided it, but he purposely didn't. But no. And of course the sub-articulation of the 2x2 of the lament, that it's beautiful, but it's important in the piano to keep an ambiguity between the appoggiatura release, tension release, tension release, tension release. Also the connection, the bridge, because it's as dramatic to rise these minor 6th or diminished 7th intervals, this kind of mysterious, unresolved way, and then as well as having the drops of the fourths. So it cannot be legato because of the lament by 2x2, but the second of the 2 shouldn't be staccato. You either re-articulato. It's like a change of bow, but still keep throughout. The phrasing is the direction, the arch that leads you like on the wings of a bird in the soaring up in the blue skies. And this mystery when the answer enters with the contrasubject with those dissonance intervals. The bridge and the third voice. To devour in this fugue is that while it's so spread, chromatic, romantic in the sense of the unresolved diminished sevenths, so much seeking something away, an escapement somewhere, an escapism to another dimension of music. It sounds almost atonal, but of course it's only an optical, audio illusion. is the fact that he uses very little complexities purposely, and now first things must be purposeful, is when he does his episodes, because all of a sudden you have those sacred sequences for Bach. Bach's using the circle of fifths constantly as a dial to go from one place to another, and in this case the intensity of the subject and the answer in their lips chromaticisms, enigmatic ways, and at the same time extremely long and stretched phrase in the, even if the subarticulations might be 2 by 2 for the lament effect of the appoggiaturas, it's a large, long stretch. What can I say? I shouldn't say anything. I should let the music say. And the fact that I play this piece, I hear it as the day I discovered it in my ears, by eyes, or by playing, or by writing, or by copying it. It's like an immersion in Bach's thinking process, far from getting the arrogance to imagine that I can follow it, but I can at least get close enough to the sun without to get burned. The more it unveils, the more it's polyphonically uplifting as a plenitude of the soul, in a consistent and constant blossoming of the elements, no collision, no overstatement, just the endless flow appearing to be, and because the fugue stretches quite, well, not long enough, in fact, even if it seems endless when you play it, because it gives that sense of eternity, that kind of solace that Bach's music gives us, or consolation, especially in this B minor, very long fugue. And then when it's finished, in fact, you don't feel like it should end. You feel like in the inner traction of the inertia, you want it to continue. And when you finish, nothing but the two opposite direction diminished thirds. Book 1, Prelude 1. There's so many things that combined create a sense of feast of affects. But beyond that, it's when you elevate yourself over all these details, you feel like there is a sentence that is going forever. It's a kind of fugue that talks to you more than you talk to it. It makes you do what it is supposed to mean. It's difficult to play it. Somebody who might like that option can make it viable, meaningful, honest, earnest, the reflection of how the music, you inhale the piece through the score and you exhale it through your playing. And in between is the moment you captured this or that element that means to you more than others. It be a design, a drawing of a pattern, a second beat, a third beat, a syncopation, a hymnal. And in the object of the prelude, which is preparing to this complex in long fugue, you feel like this is almost cleansing after the complexities. A minor, book 2. That he wants something, a trio sonata of great simplicity, of the tonic to the dominant, the double bar with repeat, you take it or not. There's no roll. Just making it up on the Stabat Mater of Pergolesi, overlapping voicing that creates a suspension that is released before you overlap on the next. And it's always at the moment where the suspension becomes the dissonant that is emotionally so intense that the decay starts. So you cannot restrike because then it's an appoggiatura. You have to tie, but it doesn't. You don't want it to decay too early, and you cannot crescendo holding it. It's not that what the piano does. So you have to play it a little louder at the get-go. Play one of the two overlapping voices that helps create that dissonance on each downbeat to be heard by echo. But if you do each, and then you hear, that's not right. This amalgamation of the two voices in one is not right. It's up and down stems. That doesn't have to be over ornamented, especially don't play naked the first, and if you take the repeat second time with more decorations or just more ornaments. Then it's always difficult to hold back from doing too much. How much is too much? A hint is an exaggeration. You go slightly out of the tracks and then you don't know how to return into the track, because then you've done something that it could be suggested in the style, the genre. After you played 48 of them, you end up having in your subconscious a lot of knowledge of his, as I like to say, for the craftsmanship aspect of the composing of these pieces as toolbox. But in fact, now more than ever, with the authenticity being the guide of the publications, of the editions, plus the interpretations on original instruments of the time, the pianists remain a little bit on the side with Bach on the road. But in fact, I think they do a parallel, beautiful road that is not to contradict nor to imitate the instruments of the past, and therefore the know-how of the performance being informed, historically informed performance. I think it's about bringing your own sensitivity to it, granted in a stylistic shape of the time period that you don't want to ignore. And you can't ignore, and you shouldn't ignore, but you should still bring what the elements of the piece combined bring to your psyche of today, having heard Scriabin, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and many since Bach. But you still play Bach, not because you've heard Rachmaninoff, Chopin, Liszt, and many, but because you isolate yourself to a certain extent from this influence, because they were very influenced by Bach themselves when they composed their works. So it's going back to Daddy. In the last B minor of Book 2 from 1740, 20 years after the first, the cut time that he uses as a suggestion for tempo should be taken into account, and in which case the written out decoration, which sounds like a turn, therefore an ornament, but because Bach's pedagogical way, he notates it with rhythm values. So you don't do, if your fancy were to do that, because he places it on the second beat and none other. Now you can do a lighter touch, air legato, and then legato for the eighth notes and search for the high note, which is C sharp. And embed elegantly the decoration. So can you do all these subtleties with a flow of the natural flow of things, slightly less slow? And when a student asks you, what should I bring out? This in the top right hand, or this in the left hand? Which is the theme? What am I supposed to bring out? Which prevails? And I would answer, what do you hear? What do you think? What do you feel? How do you picture yourself offering this piece through your playing for the piece itself, and then share with the audience how you reflect what you receive from the piece? And I think in reality, They're both as important, non-exclusively. Second reproduction of the sequence in the bridge. So many bars to go to the relative major of D major when he was in B minor. So B minor, D major. You have 2 out of 3 that are common. Why do a whole sequence of circle of fifths? Traveling even to the most natural satellite, so to say, to the principal minor key of B minor, the relative major of D major, he travels through a sequence of circle of fifths that makes you long for it, that makes you understand where you are going by hoping, guessing. It's almost like taking you by the hand in the narrative storytelling. In a faster tempo, this becomes more about a bar a beat rather than every beat of the bar. For instance, you feel a hypermeter of 4 bars. 1, 2, third, fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Faster pace. I'm looking through the window of the train and the landscapes are changing too fast for me to comprehend what's happening. I think it doesn't need to be overstatedly slow. For me, the tempo of the book 1 B minor prelude, but book 2, elegant in its turns and elegant in its inversions. It's of course something that has to do with the quality of the touch articulation, of the lightness of the 16th note, where they have to be played fast and not heavy, because the percussive aspect of the piano in denial, and always bring the important notes and search to write down and circle the higher notes so that you can organize yourself to go towards the horizon line, magnetically calling you when you bridge your phrases, sentences. In the book 2's fugue, he chooses to do the exact opposite of the reflective, enigmatic, chromatic, profoundly deep of us. Obviously, both not at the same time, but very deep, yeah, probably. This is more of a dance. And that gives that pomp, pumped up, driven element, because if you play it more singing and relaxing in the sense of no rhythmic stress, I think these leaps of octave need to be phrased by separation. Tied, well, it cannot be tied because it's an apogee. But you'll do the long short slur, and if you want to do it in between, short long, long short, combine hemiola on the 8 bar, that every bar is just 3 notes, but there are at least 12/8 in groups. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perhaps the tempo is what modern piano, with its busyness of articulation, richness of overtones, gives a more toccata aspect in terms of the detached, involved articulation. Ta 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 ta. Every note. Fa mi fa mi re mi do re. And okay, the book 1 is fa re si sol fa si, with a big stretch and singing not too fast notes, even if they're 8th notes. He starts with the same 3 notes for the book 2, but I think they're staccato. Imagine they're legato. And here they are. So yeah, it is a triad in arpeggiation. And those trills in the contra subject, I tell you, they are difficult. They have to be played so much on the edge of the key so that you can play more notes in less time without to bubble too loud. Because then they distract from the listening to the answer which you're displaying. So if it's a little more moderate, logical thing to do is always take into account the fastest patterns of rhythmic values, and then define a tempo because of them for the earlier, let's say 8th notes, in this case because of the next to come 16th notes in all the voices. Bridges or entrances in different modulated tonalities of the subject and the answer. But I think if you find a grounded downbeat, fa, re, si, la, si, do, re, mi, fa, sol, 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 fa, of course you give it a character that it doesn't have by se, in terms of bowing, subphrasing, and possibly even in a faster tempo, a sense of rebouncing always of the downbeat up, fa, re, si, la, si, do, re, mi, fa, sol, 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 fa, 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 mi, re, do, re, si, la, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, re, re, do, si, la, si, la, si, la, si, la, si, fa, sol, la, sa, fa, mi, fa, sol, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, si, la, fa, re, si, do, sol, la, do, re, si, la, sa, fa, sol, la, si, la, si, la, si, do. That's silly. But for the book 1, beyond sorrow, I think the enigma should remain. difficult to part with the piece. It plays in your head, in your soul, in your mind. Once you've memorized it by itself, like as if it's replaying constantly. This trio sonata of the prelude. I think ultimately that's what Bach is about. It teaches us while it intrigues us. It marvels us while it bewilders. And we are constantly, regardless of how long it has been since he wrote them, those pieces, and how much you've known them even before you rediscover them, or even you discover them as a student. They have such wealth of things to bring to you. You realize layers about each of those pieces that you hadn't seen before. So in a way, you return as a child to the piece, serving the muse at the best, and realizing that you might or not at some point grasp how to play it so beautifully, meaningfully, completely absorbed and informed, but intensely responding to your musicianship's intuition, to your spontaneity. That shouldn't be lost while you study and learn on them. Oh, my beloved scores. Bach Gesellschaft edition, Mademoiselle Boulanger offered me with her own fingerings, organist fingerings, articulations. Not so much pianist, let less harpsichordist. Though she was a very driven musician for the essence of the soul of the work, of the thought processes, and of the meaning of it and how we have to serve it without to use it. But she was not, at that time, at least when I knew her in her last decade of so many of teaching, almost 7, if not 8 by then, since I was a child and our difference of age was abyssal. But in front of pieces like this, we were both holding hand on her deathbed and solfeging them. And I must say that bread and butter, as they say this is, these are also exercises for the mind, they're exercises for the soul, they're exercises for the memory, they're exercises for the fingers, they're exercises for the articulations and the pedaling and the harmonic and the polyphonic and awareness and bringing out the beauties that you have discovered that inspired you so much that you want to play at the best of your ability because you personally love the pieces. Oh, perhaps some less than others. You cannot perhaps say, oh my God, the 48 are my favorite, each and all. Perhaps some less now, some more later. It's a travel companion. You discover inner beauties in the pieces later that you haven't seen, either because of one or another element of learning it, you know, the fingers, the memorization, exam, jury, audition, whatever it was needed to be used for as a tool as well as to learn. Your trade on the keyboard, especially for polyphony, which was essentially pedagogically Bach's tool, despite the fact that for the time, which escapes us today on the modern piano, the tuning in the well-tempered manner allowed for the unison to play on the same keyboard in every tonality, including those that were almost never visited in the past of the harpsichordists. So it did create, and at the same time, a fingering issue. How do you deal with all these topographies of the terrain that are different in F sharp minor or C minor as well? But once you put all together in the equation, all the challenges that this music that most of the time children are obliged to learn by teachers before they understand the purpose, the meaning, the importance, and the capacity by themselves later to take the juices off for their own enhancement as musician, for their own better understanding of the Bach partitas or Bach chromatic fantasy and fugue, Bach cantatas, Bach fugue on the organ, Bach sacred music, Bach spiritual uplifting, Bach vocal music, it's all in there. And 20 years apart, it seems to be just a continuation without any impression that we have been changing time periods stylistically. Bach seems to be the benevolent, I think that's the right accent, the benevolent caregiver for us musicians. It teaches us, it consoles us, it challenges us, it brings us to develop our capacity to follow several voices equally and continuously, with all the rhythmic and rests and rhythmic patterns and all the ways that he tries to obviously sample different genres in the same books. This is literally a life's best companion for a musician. At least it was for me. And I'm so enthused when I see students of mine approach them. I don't expect them to approach them with my taste of my choice of quoting interpretation for them. In this survey we saw different options that I presented for you in different ways. But it's not because anything goes, it's because I remain with great conviction still extremely tolerant for another point of view that will convince me. And I find that when you play what it means to you, beyond what you are taught, what you learned, what you understood, but also what your impulsive musicianship inevitably calls you that you cannot not do. You have to respond also to your inner call, as well as to the, after the innate, the learned. And then when you play, even if your understanding of the piece evolves with time, you play it with successive convictions every 10, 20 or 30 years perhaps, or less or more. And some perhaps of the preludes and fugues remain for some reason enigmatic to you, regardless how many times you have studied them or performed them or taught them. And some others you feel more kinship with. Oh, the more lament, or the more driven, the more playful, or the more genre French overture, or Sicilian dance, or the dotted rhythms, or the, you know, it's not like everything is equal. It's just that inevitably, like in human life, you develop tastes for art, for food, for humanity. And you are choosy, and you become picky, and you say, oh, I like rather only these kind of whatever it is. You can say, I like only the slow preludes because I think through them I feel more reflective, and or I like the fast ones that allow me to work on the velocity of the fingers. And the jubilation is part of these pieces too. And the consistency, even in most of the preludes, not only in the fugues, of the polyphony on the keyboard seems to be the key eye opener, ear opener, brain opener, horizon line exponentially expanding towards how do you embrace all these beauties, and how do you display them, and how you present them, and how you organize your ornaments, rhythmized or not, your decorations articulated with lightness of touch or not, your thematic materials heavily presented or just suggested and hinted without to create always bombastic entrance to remember that this is why I'm doing the fugue. In a way, you have to be so consistently aware of the beauty, meaning, nobility, and the quality of the design of the inner voices. Nothing is hidden under the carpet in Bach. I find that learning the well-tempered clavier as a copyist from memory, singing one part, playing another part, then playing from your own multi-staves notation, not the keyboard notation on two staves with up and down stems. You play the piece through your fingers, sharing voices between hands when you need to, because you'll have to when there are more than two by essence. But you know what? Every time you rediscover it, you see, I could go further in that. I could connect this, I could bring that out, I can hint this at this point. Find the right tone to express this incredible mix of craftsmanship and artistry. That's Bach. As a child, I imagined him as a giant whose head is in heaven and his feet all the way down are in the ground. Like a good peasant and a completely uplifted scholar. Both noble actions. As if he was a giant, rising us up with our souls, and at the same time giving us groundwork for the, in fact, jubilation of playing them. Each and all of these, prelude and fugues.